The distress signal had been repeating for 6 hours before anyone in the galaxy bothered to respond. 6 hours of a small world choking on its own poisoned air, 6 hours of mothers pulling their children underground into shelters that were never built to last, 6 hours of silence from every government, every fleet, and every council representative who had sworn an oath to protect the weak. Humanity responded in 7 minutes. The relief carrier Steadfast dropped out of faster-than-light travel above Drayden. For with its cargo bays already open and its medical teams already suited up, Captain Lee's Brant stood at the deployment ramp and looked down at the planet below. The surface was covered in a sickly yellow haze. Toxic chemical clouds rolled across what had once been green farmland. Somewhere beneath that haze, 200,000 Drithani were dying. Full deployment, Lee's ordered. Every team, every shuttle, every supply crate. Nobody stays on this ship. The Drithani were a small species. Adults stood barely up to a human's chest, covered in soft brown fur with wide dark eyes that made them look permanently startled. They were peaceful to a fault. They had no military, no weapons industry, and no enemies. What they had was a colony built on top of a council-approved mining operation that had gone catastrophically wrong. The chemical processors had failed, and the runoff had turned their atmosphere into poison. Lees led the first team down personally. The moment the shuttle doors opened, the smell hit them even through their filtration masks. Burning chemicals and something worse underneath it. Something organic. The Drithani shelters were scattered across a valley. Half of them collapsed. Small bodies lay near the entrances of the ones that had failed. Get the oxygen generators running first, Lee said to her lead engineer. Then medical tents. Then food. Go. For 11 days, the humans worked without rest. They rotated in shifts, but most people skipped their rest periods and went back out. The medics treated chemical burns on Drithani children who did not understand what was happening to them. The engineers rebuilt atmospheric scrubbers using parts from their own ship. The volunteers carried the sick on their backs when the ground vehicles could not reach the remote shelters that on the fourth day, Lees found a collapsed shelter at the edge of the settlement. The rescue teams had marked it as empty, but something made her stop. She heard a sound from under the rubble. A small, thin wheezing. She dug with her hands until her gloves tore, and underneath a fallen wall panel, she found a Drithani child curled into a ball, barely breathing. His fur was matted with dust and chemical residue. His eyes were closed. She picked him up and held him against her chest and ran. The medics saved him. His name was Moreau. He was 6 years old, and he had been under that rubble for 3 days, breathing through a tiny gap in the debris. The doctor said he would recover, but his lungs would carry scars for life. While all of this was happening, Ambassador Danny Harlow sat at her office on the Concord Capital Station and sent a formal request to the High Council. Emergency medical supplies, evacuation ships, financial relief for the survivors. Standard procedure for a disaster of this scale. The Council acknowledged her request. High Arbiter Alyu, the ancient insectoid leader who had held his position for over a century, said the matter would be taken under review. Other council members sent messages of sympathy. Beautiful words, carefully written, completely useless. Days passed. No supplies came. No ships were sent. No funds were released. Danny sent a second request, then a third. Each time, the response was the same. The matter was under review. The council needed more information. There were procedural requirements that had to be met. On Drayden 4, 16 human volunteers died from toxic exposure. Their filtration equipment was not designed for 11 straight days of operation in a chemical wasteland. They knew the risks. They stayed anyway. When the crisis was finally stabilized, the humans had saved 187,000 lives. They had done it alone. Not a single council ship had entered the system. Not a single credit of council funding had been released. Lee sat beside Moreau's bed in the field hospital on the last night. The child was sleeping, his small chest rising and falling beneath a human-made oxygen mask. His fur had been cleaned, and someone had wrapped him in a soft blanket from the Steadfast crew quarters. He looked peaceful for the first time since she had found him. Behind her, a screen on the wall played a live broadcast from the council chamber. Arbiter Alu stood at his podium, his segmented limbs folded in what the insectoid species considered a gesture of dignity. He was giving a speech about the Drathan for crisis. The spirit of galactic cooperation has once again proven that our concord is strong, Alu said. In times of hardship, we stand together. He did not mention humanity. Not once. Not the 16 dead volunteers. Not the 11 days of nonstop work. Not the ship that had arrived in 7 minutes when the rest of the galaxy waited 6 hours. Lise stared at the screen for a long time. Then she looked down at Moreau, still sleeping, still breathing through a mask that humans had built, in a hospital that humans had set up, on a world that humans had saved. She turned the screen off and sat in the silence. Something had changed. She could feel it. Not anger exactly. Something quieter and heavier than anger. Something that felt like a door closing very slowly and for the very last time. Nobody in the council chamber had ever seen Danny Harlow wear black before. She was known for soft colors, calm voices, and the kind of patient smile that made even hostile diplomats lower their guard. For 15 years, she had been the face of human diplomacy, the woman who could sit across from a species that openly despised her kind and still find something to agree on by the end of the meeting. Today, she wore black. Today, she did not smile. The chamber was a massive domed room at the center of the Concord Capital Station. 12 seats for the elder races formed a high arc above the main floor. Below them, representatives of the junior species filled rows of smaller seats. The room was designed to make anyone standing on the speaker's platform feel small. That was the point. Danny stood on the platform and did not feel small at all. 30 years, she began. Humanity has been a member of the Galactic Concord for 30 years. In that time, we have responded to 114 major crises across Concord space. We have deployed medical teams to 47 worlds. We have provided emergency engineering support during 61 infrastructure failures. We have served as peacekeepers in 22 border conflicts. We have buried 209 of our people in the process. She paused and looked up at the 12 seats. Every elder council member was watching her. Arbiter Alu sat at the center, his compound eyes unreadable. In those same 30 years, humanity has submitted 19 formal proposals to this council. Trade agreements, colony development plans, resource sharing initiatives. Every single one was denied or delayed into irrelevance. We have requested a permanent council seat 4 times. Each time we were told we were not ready. She placed a data tablet on the podium. I am here today to make that request a 5th time. This document contains the full record of humanity's service to this alliance. Every mission, every deployment, every life lost. I asked the council to review this record and grant humanity the seat it has earned. The debate that followed lasted 2 hours. Several junior species spoke in support. The Drathani representative, still shaken from the recent disaster on his homeworld, gave a brief and emotional statement about the humans who had saved his people. A few others added their voices. Then Ren stood. The tall, silver-skinned Selthri diplomat was one of the few non-human officials who had consistently advocated for humanity. His species were amphibious, graceful, and known for their blunt honesty. I have served in this chamber for 20 years, Ren said. In that time, I have watched this council take from humanity again and again while giving nothing in return. Every time a crisis erupted, we looked to the humans. Every time a difficult mission needed volunteers, we called the humans. And every time the humans asked for recognition, we told them to wait. He looked directly at Alu. How much longer do we expect them to wait? The chamber was quiet after that. Alu let the silence stretch, then folded his segmented limbs and spoke. The council appreciates the passion of our Selthri colleague and the dedication of our human friends. Humanity's contributions are valued deeply. However, a council seat carries responsibilities that require a level of political maturity and interstellar experience that humanity, while growing admirably, has not yet fully demonstrated. He paused, and his tone shifted to something almost gentle, the way an adult might speak to a child who had asked to stay up past bedtime. Humanity is young, eager, full of potential, but potential is not the same as readiness. I am confident that in time, perhaps another generation, humanity will be prepared for the weight of council leadership. He called for a vote, 0.9 against, 3 in favor. The number hung in the air like a verdict. 9 elder races, sitting in their high seats, had looked at 30 years of sacrifice and decided it was not enough. Not even close. Danny picked up her data tablet. She thanked the council for their time. Her voice was steady and polite and completely empty of warmth. She walked out of the chamber without looking back. Rin caught up with her in the corridor outside. His silver face was tight with frustration. Danny, I am sorry. I truly believed we had enough support this time. She kept walking for a few steps, then stopped. She stood very still, staring at the wall in front of her. Rin waited. He had known her long enough to understand that her silences were more important than most people's speeches. 30 years, she said quietly. 209 dead. 114 missions. And they told us we were not mature enough. Rin put a hand on her arm. There will be another chance. We can build more support, find new allies among the junior species. Danny turned to look at him. Her expression was calm, but there was something behind her eyes that Rin had never seen before. Not anger, not sadness, something colder and more final than either. That was the last time I asked, she said. She walked away down the corridor, her footsteps echoing off the metal floor. That night, in her private quarters, Danny sat at her desk and opened a secure communication channel. The encryption was military grade, routed through 3 separate relay stations. The connection reached Earth in 4 seconds. On the other end, a room full of people had been waiting for her call. They already knew the result of the vote. They had been preparing for this outcome for a long time. Longer than anyone in the Concord would have guessed. Danny looked into the camera and said 5 words. Begin the quiet withdrawal. The screen went dark. Across the galaxy, nothing changed. The stars burned the same as they always had. The trade routes hummed. The council filed its reports and closed the session. Nobody noticed that something had ended. Not yet. The first sign that something was wrong came not with an explosion or a battle or a dramatic announcement. It came with an unanswered message that a seismic event struck a colony in the Felden system. Standard Level 3 disaster. The kind of thing that happened a few times a year across Concord space. The kind of thing that had a simple, predictable response chain that everyone in the galaxy had memorized by now. Alert goes out. Humans respond. Crisis handled. Everyone moves on. The alert went out. 12 hours passed. No human ships moved. The Concord Emergency Coordination Office sent a direct request to the Human Delegation Office on the Capital Station. The message was routine, almost casual. There was no urgency in the wording because there had never needed to be. Asking humans to help was like asking water to flow downhill. It simply happened. Danny Harlow responded with a single paragraph. It was polite, properly formatted, and carried the official seal of the human diplomatic mission. It said, "The United Earth government respectfully declines this deployment request. We recommend the Council utilize its own emergency resources to address the situation. We wish the people of Felden a swift recovery." The coordinator who received the message read it 3 times. Then she forwarded it to her supervisor. Her supervisor forwarded it to the Council Liaison Office. The Liaison Office forwarded it to Arbiter Alyu's personal staff. Nobody quite knew what to do with it. There was no procedure for this. There was no file, no protocol, no historical record of humanity ever saying no. Alyu's staff sent a follow-up message asking if there had been a miscommunication. Danny responded with the same message, word for word. Within a week, 2 more crises hit Concord space. A border skirmish flared up between 2 minor species in the outer reach. A trade route collapsed after a navigation beacon failed near a high-traffic corridor. In both cases, the standard expectation was that human peacekeepers or human engineers would handle it. In both cases, the human delegation sent the same polite refusal. Then a medical emergency broke out on a station in the Midrim. A contaminated water supply was making hundreds of residents sick. The station administrator sent a frantic request directly to the nearest human outpost. The outpost was empty. The humans had packed up and left 4 days earlier. No announcement. No explanation. Just empty rooms and disconnected power lines. Panic did not set in immediately. Panic requires the understanding that something has truly gone wrong, and most of the galaxy was still operating under the assumption that this was temporary. A misunderstanding, a negotiating tactic, something that would resolve itself in a few days once the humans made their point. Ren did not share this assumption that he visited Danny in her quarters on the capital station. She let him in without hesitation. She was sitting at her desk with a cup of water, reading through a stack of reports. She looked calm. She looked like someone who had been waiting for a long time and had finally arrived where she needed to be. "The Concord is confused," Ren said carefully. "I imagine so. They think this is a tantrum. I know what they think." Ren sat down across from her. "Danny, I need to understand what is happening. I cannot help you if I do not know what this is." She put down her reports and looked at him. "This is not a tantrum, Ren. This is not a negotiation. We're not trying to scare anyone into giving us what we want." "Then what is it?" "Is a decision. Humanity has decided that we will no longer volunteer our people, our ships, and our resources for an alliance that treats us as servants. We are not leaving the Concord. We are not declaring anything. We are simply choosing to stop doing work that we are not recognized or compensated for." Ren was quiet for a moment. "And the people who will suffer in the meantime? The colonies that depend on human response teams." Danny's expression did not change, but something flickered behind her eyes. "Every one of those colonies also has a council representative who voted against us. Every one of those species sat in that chamber and watched all you call us children and did nothing. They had 30 years to build their own emergency infrastructure. They chose not to because they knew we would always be there." She paused. "We're teaching the galaxy what our absence feels like. That is not cruelty. That is honesty." Ren left without arguing. He understood her position even if it frightened him. Over the next few days, the quiet withdrawal continued. Human personnel on Concord stations began packing their things and boarding transport ships. Research teams pulled out of joint projects. Engineering crews stopped maintaining equipment they had been informally servicing for years. Trade liaisons closed their offices. All you held a brief press conference. He stood at his podium with the same composed posture he always had, and he called humanity's actions a temporary emotional response that would resolve itself once cooler heads prevail. He reminded the press that the Concord had functioned for thousands of years before humanity arrived and would continue to function long after this moment passed. That same evening, a minor fire broke out in a docking bay on the capital station. It was small, easily contained, and not dangerous. But the station residents near the bay did something instinctive. They turned and looked toward the corridor that led to the human residential section. The corridor was dark. The doors were sealed. A small notice was posted on the wall. Human delegation offices relocated. For inquiries, contact the United Earth Embassy on Earth. The fire was put out eventually. It took 40 minutes. A human team would have handled it in 5. The galaxy was beginning to learn what silence sounded like. It took exactly 31 days for the Galactic Concord to begin falling apart. Not dramatically. Not all at once. It happened the way a building collapses when you remove the foundation one piece at a time. Slowly at first, then with a grinding inevitability that made everyone watching wonder how they had missed the cracks that had been there all along. The plague hit 2 connected colony worlds in the center corridor. A fungal infection that spread through ventilation systems. The colonies had a combined population of 800,000. Their local medical infrastructure was minimal, designed to handle minor injuries and common illnesses, because for as long as anyone could remember, the humans handled the serious things. The council scrambled to organize a response. All you appointed a task force. Committees were formed. Reports were requested. Supply chains were reviewed. Authorization forms were drafted, reviewed, revised, and redrafted. 12 days after the plague was first reported, the Council's medical response team finally arrived on the surface point 12 days. A human rapid response team would have been there in 12 hours. In those 12 days, 14,000 people died. Most of them were elderly or very young, the kind of people who could not outrun a slow disaster. The kind of people the humans always reached first because they did not wait for authorization forms. The news spread across the Concorde like a cold wind. 14,000 dead. Not because the plague was unstoppable. Not because the medicine did not exist. But because nobody could move fast enough without the humans. The trade routes were next. Humanity had informally patrolled the major shipping corridors for years. Not officially. The Council had never formally asked them to. But human patrol ships had a habit of being in the right place at the right time, and pirates had learned long ago that raiding a convoy near a human patrol was a losing bet. Without those patrols, the pirates came back. 3 cargo convoys were raided in a single week. 2 of them were carrying food supplies to Outer Rim colonies. The price of basic goods on a dozen worlds doubled overnight. On Dre then. 4. The recovery that the humans had started began to stall. The atmospheric scrubbers that human engineers had rebuilt were complex machines that needed regular maintenance. Without the engineering teams, small problems became big problems. Filters clogged. Output dropped. The air quality in the lower valley settlements started declining again. Moreau noticed it before the adults did. He was 6 years old, and his damaged lungs were more sensitive than anyone else's. He started coughing again at night. Not badly, not dangerously, but enough. His caretaker arranged a video call with Captain Lees Brandt, who was back in the Steadfast in orbit around Earth. Moreau sat in front of the screen with his knees pulled up to his chest and his wide, dark eyes looking directly into the camera. "When are you coming back?" he asked. Lees looked at him for a long time before answering. "I do not know, Moreau. The air does not taste right anymore." "I know. Can you fix it from there?" "No, I cannot fix it from here." Moreau was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I will wait," and the call ended. Lee sat alone in her quarters afterward and stared at the wall and did not move for a very long time. Back in the Concorde, the political situation was deteriorating faster than the infrastructure. A coalition of 15 junior species drafted a formal letter to the Council demanding that humanity's grievances be addressed immediately. The letter was blunt, angry, and backed by a threat. If the Council did not act, the junior species would begin withdrawing from Concorde operations themselves. All you called a closed session. Behind sealed doors, the 12 elder Council members argued for the first time in decades. Several of them turned on all you directly. The Veshan representative, an ancient crystalline being who rarely spoke, said that all you had treated humanity like a tool and was surprised when the tool developed a will of its own. The Pelari delegate demanded an immediate vote to offer humanity a council seat. All you shut them all down. He insisted that capitulating to human pressure would set a dangerous precedent. "If we give in now," he said, "every junior species will believe they can hold the Concorde hostage with a tantrum." He refused to budge. The session ended without resolution. 2 days later, a recording of the entire closed session appeared on every major galactic news network. Every word all you had said was there. His dismissal of the dead on Dre Than 4. His comparison of humanity to a malfunctioning tool. His insistence that the junior species were too emotional to understand governance. Ren had leaked it. He never confirmed this publicly, but he never denied it either. The reaction was immediate. Species that had stayed neutral began openly criticizing the Council. Proteste message fluide Concorde communication Chanel. On 3 stations, alien residents held vigil for the 14,000 plague victims and placed human flags at the memorials. Danny Harlow watched the leaked footage from her office on Earth. She sat alone at her desk, the recording playing on a screen in front of her. Alyu's voice filled the room, thin and dismissive and utterly certain of its own correctness. Her aide stepped into the doorway. "Ambassador, the media is requesting a statement." Danny turned off the recording. She was quiet for a moment, then spoke without looking up. Now they know what the silence sounds like. She did not make a statement. She did not need to. The silence was speaking loudly enough on its own. 2 months after humanity went quiet, the sun tried to kill 4 billion people. The Veshan homeworld sat in the path of a massive solar flare, the kind that happened once every few thousand years. Their star had been stable for so long that no one had built the kind of planetary shielding that would have made this survivable. The Veshin were one of the 12 elder races. They had seats on the council. They had wealth, influence, and centuries of political power. What they did not have was a fleet large enough to evacuate their own world. The alert hit every channel in the Concorde simultaneously. For billion Veshin lives. 72 hours before the flare reached lethal intensity. A full planetary evacuation was needed, and there was only one civilization in the galaxy that had ever pulled off anything close to that scale. All contacted Danny Harlow directly. It was the first time the High Arbiter had spoken to a human representative since the withdrawal began. His message was formal, but carried an unmistakable edge of desperation beneath the diplomatic language. He invoked Article 9 of the Concord Charter, the Mutual Defense Clause, and formally requested human assistance. Danny did not respond for 6 hours. Not because she needed time to decide. She had already decided. She needed the galaxy to feel those 6 hours the same way Dre then. Four had felt the 6 hours before the Steadfast arrived. When she finally responded, she did not send a private message. She broadcast on every open channel in Concord space. Every station, every ship, every colony with a working receiver heard her voice at the same time. Citizens of the Galactic Concord, she began. 2 months ago, humanity stepped back from its role as this alliance's first responder. We did this because 30 years of service had earned us nothing but dismissal, and we believed the galaxy needed to understand what our absence meant. She paused. Across the Concord, billions of beings were listening. Today, for billion Veshin lives are at risk. The Council has invoked the Mutual Defense Clause and asked for our help. I want to address this request openly because I believe the people of this galaxy deserve honesty. She lifted a data tablet and began reading. Not statistics this time. Names. Dr. Amara Osei, engineer first class, died of toxic lung failure on Draven 4. She was 31 years old. Corporal Ruben Diaz, medical volunteer, died of chemical exposure on day 9. He was 24. Nurse Hannah Kimura collapsed during her 4th consecutive shift treating Drithani children. She was 29. She read 16 names. One for every human who had died saving Draven 4. Each name was followed by their age, their role, and how they died. The reading took 4 minutes. For minutes of silence across the entire galaxy, as every species listened to the cost of being humanity's neighbor. When she finished, she set the tablet down. High Arbiter All-You, in a closed council session, referred to humanity as a malfunctioning tool. He called our withdrawal tantrum. He said that giving us recognition would set a dangerous precedent. Another pause. Longer this time. We will help the Veshin people. We will do this because 4 billion lives matter more than politics, and because saving people who cannot save themselves is what humanity does. It is who we are. Her voice hardened. But we will not do it under the authority of a council that spent 30 years treating our compassion as a resource to be extracted and our forgiveness as proof that we could be ignored. This operation will be conducted under human authority, under the human flag, and on our terms. Within an hour, the largest humanitarian fleet in galactic history launched from Earth and 6 human colony worlds. 412 ships, carriers, transports, medical frigates, engineering vessels, and escort cruisers. Every ship bore the blue and white insignia of the United Earth Government. Not one carried a Concord banner. Captain Lise Brandt commanded the lead carrier. She had not slept in 30 hours, and she did not plan to sleep for another 30. When her ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel above the Veshin homeworld, the planet filled her viewport. Beautiful, blue and silver. For a billion people looking up at a sky that was about to burn. All ships, she said into the fleet channel, begin evacuation. Priority is children, elderly, and medical-dependent populations. Move fast. Be kind. These people are scared. The evacuation took 71 hours. 71 hours of non-stop shuttle runs, orbital transfers, and desperate coordination between hundreds of ships. Human crews worked without breaks. They carried Veshin families onto transports, handed out blankets and water, and spoke in calm voices to people who had never imagined they would need to leave their own world. when the solar flare finally hit, the last transport was already in safe space. 3.9 billion Veshin had been evacuated. The remaining 100 million had been sheltered in deep underground bunkers that human engineers had reinforced in the final hours. Not a single Veshin life was lost. The footage played on every screen in the Concorde. Human ships filling the sky above the Veshin homeworld. Human hands helping alien families board evacuation shuttles. The blue and white flag on every hull, every uniform, every supply crate. All you watch from the council chamber. He stood alone at his podium, his compound eyes fixed on the largest screen. Around him, the chamber was empty. No other council members had come. They were all watching from their private offices, and none of them wanted to be seen standing next to him. The galaxy had just watched humanity save an elder race. And they had done it without the council's permission, without the council's resources, and without the council's name. The silence that followed was different from the one before. This was not the silence of absence. This was the silence before a reckoning. 3 days after the Veshin evacuation, he called an emergency session of the full council. Every elder race representative was required to attend. Every junior species was invited to observe. The chamber was packed from floor to ceiling, standing room only, with thousands more watching on live broadcast across the Concorde. All you stood at his podium and did what he had always done. He spoke with authority. He spoke with certainty. And he spoke as if the last 2 months had been nothing more than a minor disruption in an otherwise perfect system. Humanity acted outside the bounds of the Concorde Charter, he declared. They conducted a military-scale operation without council authorization. They used a humanitarian crisis to stage a political spectacle. This is not the behavior of a species that deserves a seat at this table. This is the behavior of a species that must be contained. He proposed sanctions, trade restrictions on human goods, limits on human travel through Concorde space, a formal investigation into what he called humanity's unauthorized military deployment. The chamber was silent when he finished, not the respectful silence of agreement. The silence of a room full of people watching someone who did not realize he had already lost. Ren stood first. The Selthari diplomat walked to the speaker's platform with slow, deliberate steps. His silver skin caught the light of the chamber as he turned to face the elder seats. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "High Arbiter," he began, "you have just proposed punishing the species that saved 4 billion Veshin lives, while standing in a chamber that could not organize a medical response fast enough to prevent 14,000 plague deaths. You are asking us to sanction compassion while rewarding incompetence." He turned to face the wider chamber. "I have served here for 20 years. In that time, I have watched this council exploit humanity's willingness to help. I have watched you send them into every disaster, every conflict, every crisis, and then deny them recognition because admitting their value would mean sharing your power." His voice dropped. "The Veshin are alive because of humans. The Drithani are alive because of humans. Half the species in this room owe their survival to a people you called immature and a malfunctioning tool." He looked back at all you. "You are not protecting the Concorde, Arbiter. You are protecting your position. And you are doing it badly." The dam broke. One by one, representatives from species across the Concorde stood and added their voices. The Drithani delegate spoke about the 16 humans who died saving his world. The Pelari representative described how human engineers had rebuilt their space station's life support after a catastrophic failure 3 years ago and received nothing in return. A delegate from species so small they needed a hovering platform to reach the microphone simply said, "We would be dead without them." The coalition of 15 junior species formally presented their demand. A vote of no confidence in High Arbiter Oliu.it was the first such vote in 800 years. The procedure was so old that the council clerks had to look up how it worked. When the votes were counted, the result was overwhelming. 39 species voted to remove Oliu. 3 abstained. None voted in his favor. Oliu stood at his podium for a long moment after the count was announced. His compound eyes moved slowly across the chamber, as if he was seeing it for the first time. Then he turned and walked out through a side door without a word. He would not be seen in the chamber again. The following day, Danny Harlow was invited to address the Reform Council. She arrived in the same black clothes she had worn the day of the failed vote, 2 months ago. But this time, when she walked to the speaker's platform, she did not carry a tablet full of data and requests. She carried a proposal. "I'm not here to demand anything," she said. "I'm here to offer something. A new charter for this alliance. One built on 3 principles: genuine equality, mutual obligation, and shared sacrifice. No species gives more than it receives. No species benefits from the work of others without recognition. And no species is ever told it is not mature enough to sit at the table where decisions about its own people are made." She outlined the proposal in clear terms. A restructured council with rotating leadership. A formal crisis response system with shared duties and shared credit. A permanent seat for humanity, not as a reward, but as a correction of something that should have been done decades ago. The charter was ratified the same day. 42 species voted in favor. None opposed. That evening, Danny stood alone on the observation deck of the Capitol station and looked out at the stars. Wren found her there, as he often did. "You could have asked for more," he said. "After everything, you could have demanded control of the entire crisis response system. You had the leverage." Danny shook her head. "That is not who we are. We do not want control. We want partnership. There is a difference." Wren was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled, a rare expression for self-re. "I think the galaxy is only just beginning to understand that difference." 1 week later, Captain Lee's Brant brought the Steadfast back to Drathen 4. A new engineering team was on board, along with fresh supplies and upgraded atmospheric scrubbers designed to run for years without maintenance. When the shuttle landed, Moreau was waiting at the edge of the landing zone. He had been standing there since dawn. The moment the ramp lowered and Lee stepped out, he ran to her so fast he nearly tripped over his own feet. She knelt down and caught him. He pressed his face into her shoulder, and she could feel his small lungs working steady and clear. "You came back," he whispered. "We are here to stay this time," she said. Years later, an alien historian would write a single paragraph that would be quoted across the galaxy for centuries to come. It read, "Humanity did not conquer the stars with warships or weapons. They conquered them by walking away and letting the galaxy realize it could not function without them. And then, because they were human, they came back anyway."